It's 11.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Collect Our Cousins, engaging white people in the struggle for full democracy. I'm so grateful to you for joining us here today. And I'm with Dr. David Campt, who I will introduce in just a moment. But I wanted to share why I have created this weekly LinkedIn series. It's really designed to help white Americans like me become more effective in our conversations with the white people in our lives, to help us build an embodied anti-racist white culture, in the words of Resmaa Menakem. I'm featuring the people who inspire me and teach me the most so that you can benefit from all they have to share as well. White Americans, the battle for our democracy will not be won in courtrooms or in the streets. It must be won in white living rooms, in our neighborhood meetings, in our conversations with our coworkers, in conversations with our friends. As an anti-racist, collecting my cousins seems to always fall to the end of my to-do list. Oh, I'll get to that next month. So in 2022, I'm doing the Collect Our Cousins Challenge, and I want you to do it too. Write a list of your white family and friends who you are going to work on this year. And as we'll talk about in a moment, if you haven't been in contact with them for a while, you got to build the relationship first before, engaging in conversations about anti-racism. But we'll come to that in just a moment. Um, Without further ado, I'd like to introduce my guest today for our inaugural program. And Dr. David Campt is the founder of the Dialogue Company, as well as the White Ally Toolkit. Write that down, White Ally Toolkit. Google that, use that. It is an incredibly useful method of talking with white people for white people. And if you get the opportunity, go to one of Dr. Camp's incredible workshops where you get to practice this and engage directly with him, as well as he has a clubhouse room on Sundays at 2 o'clock Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. It's called White People Whisperer, and it is a really, really, really great clubhouse room where you will develop a lot of skills. Welcome to Collect Our Cousins, Dr. David Campt.
Thank you so much for letting me be on your first show, your debut run. Thank you so much. It's so important that you're doing this. I'm so glad it's important to do this in general, and certainly in the LinkedIn context where things are more business oriented. People still need to learn these important skills and the imperative of people talking to people who look like them to move things forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And you have helped me so much in that area, Dr. Campt. I took, well, I'm going to call you David.
Yeah.
You, your methodology and your just deep empathy and courage and the way that you engage, it really reminds me of what Audre Lorde said: the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. That if we want to win people over from white supremacy, patriarchy, we can't do it by being dominating and patriarchal and violent. We have to engage in nonviolent communication and be deeply compassionate, even when we really disagree with them. And you really helped me build my emotional bandwidth to be able to do that. And I'm so grateful that you're going to share that with everyone today.
Sure. Well, it's so important. We learned that from the civil rights movement, right? That these people were beaten, killed, etc. But the whole ethos was to come at people from a stance of compassion. And so, and we know now, 60 years later, that compassion-based methods of persuasion work better, basically. So we can talk about it from a spiritual standpoint, or we can talk about it from an effectiveness standpoint. But basically, people need to figure out how to embody compassion-based, peace-building, nonviolent ways of communication if they want to have the best chance of actually moving other people. So I'm happy to be here to talk about that.
Great. So we are on the anniversary of January 6th, white terrorist nationalist attack on our capital that nearly brought our democracy to an end. I mean, the reason why they posted so openly to social media is they thought that they were going to prevail and not face any consequences. And now 700 of them have been arrested. And Dr. Robert Pape at the University of Chicago has conducted an extensive study of those 700 and found out that they are really mainstream white Americans. 25% of them have a college degree. They traveled, they come from counties that voted for Biden. They traveled from across the country to get to DC. They are CEOs, business people, lawyers, doctors,
Right.
architects. You know, they are people that we know because they live in our neighborhoods. And as we look at that study, and he also conducted a survey of 2,000 Americans that demonstrated that 21 million Americans have two beliefs: that political violence is justified, and that Donald Trump was the legitimate winner of the 2020 election and should be the president right now. So as we go over that, what comes to mind for you? Can we reach these 21 million Americans and help them to see a different way of thinking?
Sure. So I want to say a few things about that. So I'm glad you brought this up. Obviously, today's January 6th, so it's highly appropriate that we talk about that. So on the one hand, what's important from Pape's findings to notice is that these people are mainstream people. His one of his core findings is that these people look more like mainstream America than fringe America. These are not extremists who believe this, and they look at the incarceration rates of extremists, the employment level of extremists, et cetera. And these people look more like mainstream America than extremists. So that's important to recognize. So as we talk about engaging these people, which I'm going to do in just to say a little bit about that, it's important to recognize that this is 21 million people. This is not the entire range of white folks who need to be collected. There's a particular set of people. So while I just want to make sure that we don't overly frame for the audience, we don't want to overdo who that is, but they're very important because these people are ready for essentially war, right? And so one of the things we need to think about is, what does that look like? I would just add one more comment before I even talk about how to reach those. I've been looking at some material by a woman who has a book out called How Civil Wars Start, and her name is Barbara F. Walter. This is an academic, and so I would commend people to go Google her on video on YouTube and look up a couple of things she said. And we need to be worried about civil war, not civil war that looks like 1860, but more modern civil war where there's perpetual violence and attacks by militias, et cetera. So we do need to be worried about that. Okay, so in terms of reaching these people, I think that everybody in society needs to be thinking about, how do we reach these people who have these views? Because again, these people are not extreme. They're not extremists in the classic way. These people are walking among us. So my personal opinion is that churches, nonprofits, even companies need to start saying, how do we start inoculating our democracy through dialogue now, before we have a situation in which an election is at stake? When we get to 2024 and we look at the actions that are likely to be taken by various parties all around the country who think the last election was stolen, they're going to steal this one back. We're going to have some dilemmas, I believe, as a society about what's ethical, what do we think is permitted. So we need people talking to. We need to practice our skills of dialogue. So we need churches and civic organizations and nonprofits, and even companies who dare to start having conversations about the nature of democracy, how we want to protect it, what are our ethical limits if we want our side to win, what are the things we're not willing to do to pursue that. We need to start talking about that now, so that talk about that now before the question is called in the fall of 2024. So that's at the level of institutions. At the level of individuals, I would just say that if you know people who have these beliefs, it is important to start talking with them now. To start talking, like I wrote a book. One of my books was called "Compassion Transforms Contempt." You can get it on any of my websites, the dialoguecompany.com website. You can look under products, you'll see that book. And it's all about the way that people, primarily on the left, need to engage people on the right from a standpoint of compassion, because part of what we do is people are too judgmental, they're condescending, they're preachy, and they don't use good strategies for how to engage people. So part of what we need to start doing is to talk about, for example, a way of connecting to people, is to start talking about, and it's a method I lay out in the book called the REACH method. I call it the RACE method for racial issues, the same method. Basically start talking about how you might have some similar feelings to them, right? That's a critical thing you're trying to reach people. You don't want to come at them like you're completely wrong, I'm completely right. An important part of the methodology of changing people is to try to identify with them and build connection with them. Part of what happens is that people don't want to connect with people they disagree with. They want to like give them the Heisman, right? I'm not like you. And then if you do it in conversation, that's not very effective, right? That doesn't make people feel understood or appreciated. And that's what you want to shift that. So you start talking about, for example, elections in which you were really disappointed. That's the thing that there's a connection. You can talk about your own frustrations with how the system seems to be not in favor of people like you. That's an important thing. You can start talking about how you think that sometimes there are people on your side politically who do things that you find that make you uncomfortable because it's too anti-democracy, it's too hateful. Because what you're trying to do is to not only reach the other person from a connectivity standpoint, you're trying to model for them a certain way of holding these issues that's different than what they're doing now. So in that book, I give some strategies that was written in anticipation of the election, but the principles about how you connect with people are similar. But I think that the core thing is that people need to not look at this as somebody else's problem. It is all of our problem, right? You know, what Ben Franklin say, a democracy, a republic, if you can keep it. Well, this is time for us to do the work, conversation by conversation, in order to keep it.
Yes, thank you so much, David. And as we think about how to prioritize who to have those conversations with, do you have any guidance there? Like, what is the most strategic use of our time?
Sure. So let me just say, I really think that what you said earlier about how every person, especially every white person, should make a list of all the people they might try to reach. I suggested that in workshops. Did you steal that from me? That's a great idea. No, you didn't steal it from me.
I'm sure I did. All my great ideas originate somewhere else.
People need to do that. One of the things that I do, I have in my book, the White Ally Toolkit Workbook, is some criteria for how you choose among people that you're going to, if you got a long list of people you might reach, well, you might want to make some choices about who you reach first. Like, you know, if you were trying to learn how to play competitive one-on-one basketball, you probably don't choose LeBron James as your first opponent. You probably choose people who are easier, right? So, for example, you might choose people who you have less personal baggage with, right? Because some people trigger you more than others, right? You might choose people that that are more open-minded than others. You might choose people who have high level compassion or high level self-reflection. I would just say this: if anybody, I have a worksheet that I use for this in my workshops, and if anybody, you know, I'm on LinkedIn too. If anybody wants to get I'll give out this worksheet to anybody who contacts me. So if you either contact Karen through Racy Conversations or contact me directly and just say, send me the Choosing Our Cousins worksheet, I will be happy to send that to you. But in any case, those are some criteria. Again, I said how much baggage you have with them, how how open-minded they are, how much compassion they have, and how self-reflective are they. Like if you had a list of 6 people and you could rank them all on those ledgers, there might be obvious the people who to choose, like the low-hanging fruit might be obvious. But so I would just say that you're not trying to waste your time. Anybody listening to this is a resource, and you're valuable. And becoming a good ally and doing this work is not about like spending your energy on every fool. As Dr. Eddie Moore of the White People's Conference says, there's some pancakes that cannot be flipped. So, it's not important for you to spend all your time on every fool, but you want to make good choices. And I think that the problem though is people don't engage enough. The systemic problem is people disengage too quickly. So that form and thinking like this could be helpful in choosing which people you start out with, so you can learn from that.
I'm reminded of how unions approach organizing, where they write a list of everyone who works at a work site, and then they categorize them as friendlies, neutrals, antis, and they start with the friendlies.
Right. So exactly. This is similar thinking. You don't want to start out with people who are likely to be too difficult. I try to teach a new approach to conversation. Again, I call it in race work, I call it the RACE method. It stands for reflect, calm down, ask questions, connect, find a point of connection and commonality, and then expand. Then after all of that, then you start trying to invite people to see things anew through, in the case of racial issues, talking about your own occasional racist thoughts, right? So part of if you're trying to learn a new skill, new way of relating, you don't want to start out with the difficult people. You want to start out with the seemingly easier people, still worthy of trying to change before you move up to the difficult people.
Great. So let's go over it again. Reflect and calm
down. Calm yourself down. What's important to do is, and calm down has 2 things. One is a sort of a self-regulation thing. So whether it's deep breathing or progressive body relaxation, people in my courses have learned how to do these things. You first do it for 10 minutes, and you learn how to do it 7, and then down to people can learn these methods so they can calm themselves down in a trip to the bathroom, right? So you're going to have one of those difficult conversations. You want to have developed a method of calming yourself down that's going to help you make good strategic choices. So that's one aspect of reflect. Another aspect of reflect is to like gin up your compassion for people, right? They're compassion boosters that people can do, like imagine the person crying, or imagine the person, or remember some aspiration they have for themselves that you support, right? You want to boost your compassion. And then of course there's coming up with your stories, which are the other steps of the process. So that's reflect. And then there's ask. A critical thing that people don't do, but that people who study persuasion know that you should do, is to try to get the other person talking. That people want to talk at people, but ultimately, if you're trying to persuade somebody, you want them to be talking. So you want to learn how to ask experience-based questions. Reflect, ask, connect, find something that's right about the person, where the person is coming from before you, but first. So it's the ABC rule, agreement before challenges, right? So you want to find something that you agree with that's somewhat related to what they said before you start telling them they're wrong. And then after that, there's expand. And that's when, for the topic of racism, you tell them about some moment in which you manifested the kind of racialized thinking that's a problem.
Thank you so much.
I think every white person has stories like that. So I'm asking you, Karen, can you think of a time when you're not a racist person, but we all have sometimes racist thoughts. I've had those. I have racist thoughts against people of color. Like I can tell you, I'm not gonna tell a long story, but I can tell you about the time when I like criminalized this guy. Like I thought this guy was walking behind me. He wasn't walking behind me. He didn't care nothing about me. And I thought he was following me and he was going to rob me. I went to all sorts of conniptions about that. And he was just like I noticed he had an empty backpack. Why got an empty backpack? Is that where the loot's going to go? Like I'm going to do all this kind of stuff. And the dude's just taking his backpack to a luggage repair store. Right? But I had criminalized him the way I've been criminalized. So I just want to ask you, Can you think of a time, are you willing to say it here on LinkedIn Live, that you kind of had like racially problematic thoughts?
Yes, I would say many times. I
Tell me
uh,
one.
talk about one. I remember so distinctly the first time I met my Black woman boss, which was the first time I ever had a Black woman as a boss. I walked into her office and literally my jaw dropped. Like I had a really strong mental image of what a boss looks like, and she was not it.
Mm-hmm. How did you feel? How did you feel when you noticed yourself thinking that?
Well, I felt terrible. I like pushed my jaw back up and like tried to to calm myself down so I didn't make it extremely apparent that that is what was going through my mind. And ultimately we did develop a very strong relationship. She is an incredible woman. But I just it really made me cognizant of how strong these mental pictures and assumptions are. Um, even, at the time, I would not have, I wouldn't have thought of myself as a racist person.
How many times have you told that story?
I am very guarded about sharing that story. I feel like and I love that you are like, just be vulnerable with it. Like,
I used
why
to,
do
I used
white
to always
allies try to be perfect?
right. I mean, it's a part of in my workshops. I do a lot of audience polling to sort
Uh-huh.
of whether it's back in the before time when we actually met in person, and everybody wasn't a vector of death, but now even on Zoom, I do a lot of audience polling,
Hmm.
and I typically ask people three questions: how many times in the past 5 years have you had a racially biased thought that you were not proud of? There's a distribution in frequency. How many times have you told an ally, and how many times have you told a racism skeptic? I call them racism skeptics, people, the half of white folks that don't think racism is real. And you can see from one of those questions to the other, how many times telling allies and telling skeptics, it always shifts to the lower numbers because people have these experiences, but they don't like to talk about it. For some reason, like you said, the people are guarded, they're ashamed, they're embarrassed. And what does that mean? That means racism skeptics out there don't get to hear these stories. Like
Mm.
it's no wonder so many white people don't think racism is a problem because y'all ain't talking about it. Like y'all, everybody has these thoughts, but everybody's hiding them. Like the people hiding them, and
I
then you the racist when in fact we all are subject to white superiority thinking. So
we're collecting some great comments here, and I'd like to share some of these. Michelle Simon asks, what if we live sheltered lives, working from home in a blue bubble, and don't interact directly with folks we need to have these conversations with? The only place I see them is online, which seems like the hardest place to make the sort of connections you speak of. Or do you have tips for online conversations?
okay, that's great. That's a great question. So two things. First, I want to commend a colleague of mine, Karen Tamaria. She has a project called Smart Politics, and it is all about how to have these kind of conversations online. So it's not to say on racial issues, but on political differences. So uh, she does what I do in terms of these kind of conversations, but she focuses online. I focus on in person. I would say that a critical thing to do in the online environment, if you meet somebody in an online environment, is to engage them a little, but then in public, but then try to shift to direct messaging or sort of private conversations because ultimately the race method and these kind of persuasive methods are based on sort of storytelling. Like you want them telling the reflect step, calm down, ask step, have them tell you a story about why they believe what they believe. Well, people are not going to be telling that they're not going to go into an extensive story as much in public thread as a private thread. Connect. Tell them a story that shows them you don't think they're completely crazy, that you're telling the story too, and then expand. We just talked about the importance of sharing your own moments. What you want to do as a general matter is to move even though you might find the people in a public space, you want to do your persuasive work in a private space for if one reason because people less likely to want to change their views if people are watching, right? People people are more likely to be open to hearing different things and open to changing if if they're not being publicly viewed. So I would just say that as a basic matter, it's just great that you're engaging people online and you're breaking out of your at home bubble of the pandemic through that. But you want to when you identify people that you might want to really talk to, I would move to online move to direct communication, where you can do more extensive storytelling and empathy based strategies, which might include connecting to people like this. I think that Facebook has a way of you actually talking to people. You know, I mean, all these companies have they have reasons to want you to connect, but I'm just saying you want to get away from the public space if you're trying to do persuasive work.
I mean, remember that all of these platforms profit from making us hate each other, right? The more clicks there are, the more money they make. And so the algorithm is designed to make us get inflamed and have these blow up conversations. So I agree 100% with David. Don't try and do it where everybody's piling on. That is not helpful. Take
Right.
it to a private space or pick up the phone and call them. I think all of us are feeling so isolated, and this pandemic is just interminable. And so it's really important to pick up the phone and reach out to people that way. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I hope we answered your question, Michelle. Kevin Sutton says, the former NPR host Juan Williams incident, we have all had them. And yeah, I felt terrible. Thank you for sharing that, Kevin, and thank you for being such a big supporter of me. Alyssa Stamp says, fear of failure and of not measuring up, fear of your image being tainted. Thank you for being vulnerable. This is so necessary. 100%. White allies, strive for accountability, not perfection. I see so many white allies like, oh my God, I cannot make a single mistake, so I'm just not going to do anything at all.
Well, that's true, but let's make it bigger than that. Since we're here on LinkedIn, part of what we all need to think about is how can we foster cultures of dialogue, cultures of accountability, and through dialogue. So we do a lot of corporate work, and we try to help companies who say we want to move to a culture of dialogue. So there's what we can do individually to not fall into the trap you're talking about, but also we can think about in our communal, in our collective settings, how can we shift away from a culture of blame and finger pointing to where we're expected to be perfect, and any transgression means that you got to face all sorts of horrible consequences. To one of which it's a we start from the premise that we're all subject to being imperfect. We all are subject to making mistakes. I think that's a critical shift that we need to foster within our collective cultures. But that often requires engagements and interventions, and we try to do that. But I'm just saying we want, and part of what we try to do is to try to, in addition to dealing with leaders and giving everybody some language, we also try to cultivate a set of champions in the organization. That's what you're trying to do in this LinkedIn Live but you're not necessarily in one company, but it's useful to cultivate a set of people who are saying, I'm going to step forward, and in private conversations, in around the water cooler, virtual or not, I'm going to try to move our conversations to a different level. And so that's part of our intervention strategy. And we all need to think about how we can be those forces.
Yes. I think another comment here. I think something that I struggle with is the term ally. I think many white folks like myself have a misunderstanding of what that term really means. For instance, an ally's liberation is tied up in the liberation of their ally. But I think many white folks who consider themselves allies turn it on and off when convenient. I guess my question is, how do we push ourselves and our white counterparts, cousins, to see their own liberation as liberation for people of color? And I say, Thank you so much for that comment, LinkedIn user. I was like that too. You know, I found myself like distancing myself from other white people and hanging out all the time with my Black activist friends and feeling like, oh, I'm the good white person. I'm not like those white people, and really cultivating those relationships instead of facing my people and bringing them along. And I didn't, I didn't think it was necessary to sit in groups with other white people and process our stuff. I felt like that was a waste of time. And I went on Resma Menakam's uh, workshop, Somatic Abolitionism, and he completely changed my mind. And now I'm in a white ally, we call it our white cousins group. I mean, he's the one who told me you got to go out there and collect your cousins. And he said you'll never collect your cousins with bad energy. Like we have to shift the way we approach our cousins to a place of love if we're going to bring them along.
Yeah, I'm trying to stop that white on white emotional violence. That's what
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm committed to that. Y'all got to stop being so mean to each other. So yeah, we need to change the culture, the toxicity that's within the allied community, right? So here the good news for the people listening is that if you want to be part of the shift towards, I love what you call it, pro-democracy, and not just anti-racism, but pro-democracy and anti-racism, that there's work all around. Like some of the work that people need to do is with racism skeptics. Some of the work is with other allies. It's like this question that was just raised. I mean, that's more of an advanced question, right? About how do you help people see that their own liberation is tied up with the liberation of people of color. Like I get that I get that consciousness, but let's remember, a whole bunch of white folks don't even think racism is a problem. Right?
Yes.
So there's a whole continuum of white folks. The good news is, the bad news is a whole bunch of white folks that need some level of tune-up, including you, Karen, including I need a tune-up too, right? But they need different tune-ups. So on the one hand, people are racism skeptics. Your focus needs to be on helping them see that racism is real. That you might not start out with notions of liberation and all of that. That a little bit might be too advanced, but certainly there are people
but I think it is good to have a white ally collective where you are talking about that and bringing
no question. There's no question that I'm not decrying that. I'm saying that's all. This is part of the work, and so part of what we all have to decide is, where are we going to do that work? People trying to raise kids and have jobs and all that. So there's only so much they're going to do. But so you want to make good choices about what you are doing, right? But yes, there's work to be done in the ally community, and there's work to be done with racism skeptics, and there's work to be done with these people, if you know people who are kind of on that extreme, on that hardcore edge. So part of what I think is important to recognize is that to save our democracy, to create and maybe it's a new thing to try to create a real multicultural democracy, there's more work to be done than we can do. So you can always do more. You don't need to feel bad about that, but you need to get busy doing it as opposed to avoiding doing it, which is what a lot of people do. I'm so glad that you're doing this show, and I'll be promoting it. I'll be singing from the rooftops about how people should come to this show, and other people should too.
Thank you. And stop with the doom scroll. I mean, that's what, after January 6th last year, I started doom scrolling and just getting angry. And I got in that place of urgent stuckness where I felt this tremendous need to do something, but I wasn't really doing anything,
Just feeling bad about not doing it.
Exactly. So let's come together. Thank you for this courageous conversation. I love the way we can build a vocabulary and sense of comfort to talk about race. In my work as a consultant, when the discussion is about their anti-racism or inclusive initiatives, I ask my clients to pause, reflect on what they learned about Indigenous people, and tell me if they learned anything that is positive. It's rare to hear of an experience where settlers have something they learned that is positive. Thank you for sharing that, Kyle. So important, and so much indigenous wisdom. I mean, I do believe the only way out of our environmental disaster is to rematriate the land. Um, just the way I had a long conversation with Sweetwater Nanook, who is a native Alaskan and a healer, and the head of Idle No More Washington this week. Just the whole indigenous approach to healing, and to what someone coined as restorative justice, but that's like really an indigenous wisdom, and we need to center indigenous wisdom to heal our society. They understand how how to relate with people in the right way, and how to do this as a spiritual community practice that connects us both to our ancestors and to our descendants.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm next week. Speaking of white ancestors, next week.
I can't see you no more, Karen. Take that thing down. Take that camera down.
You can't see me anymore. Okay, I'm gonna hide this. Uh, Next week I'm gonna be featuring Lynn Burnett.
Lynn's awesome. Let me just before you talk about Lynn.
Yeah, Lynn is the founder of something called the White Antiracist Ancestors Project, and he is really committed to educating white people that we come from a long line of ancestors who were engaged in anti-racism. We have living elders right now who were deeply involved in the civil rights movement, and a lot of us have never even heard of these people. And it's all about like, how can we as white people like connect with all these folks who have so much wisdom to share for us. And I the best book I read last year was The Agitators. It's about the decades-long friendship between Harriet Tubman and two white women, and how their friendship really did impact our entire country, because these white women, not only did they open their homes as stops on the Underground Railroad, one of them even sold Harriet a farm when Harriet was a runaway slave, and that was totally illegal to do, but she took that risk. And her husband was in Lincoln's cabinet, so Harriet would tell this woman stuff, she would tell her husband, and her husband would tell Abraham Lincoln. Through this woman, Harriet Tubman had direct access into Lincoln's ear. And so, anyway, we come from a long line, but reading.
The point I'm trying to make about that is that I think it's great you're having Lynn. I think that it's important as a general matter. We need to think about how do we construct a kind of a white anti-racist identity. Because part of what's going on is that given how society is changing, and people, a whole bunch of white people feel like, how do I, where's in society is room for me if we appropriately look at the role of white supremacy and the construction of white supremacy and oppression in the background and culture of white people, how do we construct a different identity that makes me not saddled with that? So what the one response is that all that stuff is lies. You're just making me feel bad. All the anti-CRT propaganda is about reacting to that. Part of what we need to do is to construct, how do we construct a positive white identity? And what Lynn's work is doing is trying to lift up white ally heroes, which I think are important to lift up, because the way people's imaginations work, we have trouble imagining themselves as people that being in a different group. So it's useful for white people who want to be allies to think that there are people taking way more chances than they are taking. It's like people put their lives on the line, and we just ask you to talk to your cousin.
Exactly.
Now, right? So people need to see that there are people in the past who've taken much more risk, had much more impact. So when we try to get you to take a deep breath and talk to your mama, that you can say, well, people have done harder work than this. So I want to lift up the importance of ally heroes in general, and Lynn's work in particular, to try to foster that. So,
and they did it for their entire lives, and they raised their kids to continue it going on, and they did it without hope that they would see the goals that they were trying to achieve in their lifetime, but they did it anyway because it was the right thing to do. And so this is really good for getting out of the doom scroll and finding the ways that we can take productive action, and there's a lot of them. We have so many great comments coming in, but let's see. I'll give this one, and then I think we should wrap up. Our white supremacy culture is embedded so deeply that racist questioning is very threatening to our white people's character at its core. This leaves white people as racially innocent without skills to talk about race. We have to normalize conversations about race and racism. Thank you. Thank you.
A critical part of that, I really appreciate that, Carrie. A critical thing that all white folks need to do is to cultivate their own confession stories. There's stories like that, the one that Karen said a little while ago, right? Cultivate, learn how to articulate and get comfortable articulating stories that will be coming behind. I'm not a racist person, but I sometimes have racist reactions. Let me give you an example. And I think that a critical thing is people cultivating 2, 3, 4 multiple stories that they're not comfortable telling, but they find their way to tell them. And sometimes those are your conversation openers. Sometimes confessing like that, sometimes it's the close of the race method, but sometimes it's the conversation opener, right? Where you're with your problematic cousin, and they have some interaction with a barista, and you really handle that in a good way. And I notice that sometimes I have the racist reactions, even though I shouldn't. Right? It's an opener, right? It's you bring up the topic so you can, because white folks have an agreement. We're not going to talk about race and racism, much less these kind of shameful things. So part of what you need to learn how to model is a way of holding your own occasionally racist views and reactions as something that is serious, but not fatal to your moral character. Something where you're not flagellating yourself, but something you are taking seriously. And so people cultivating their confession stories is a key part of that.
Yes. As you were talking, one other thing I would like to implore white allies or white people, I don't like to use the term ally, is let's not engage in the I can make white people feel worse than you can Olympics.
Y'all are so mean to each other. Stop.
We are so, and I'm like this too. I'm so suspicious, and I don't know. There's a lot of negativity. Let's welcome each other. We can learn a lot from the evangelicals. Welcome sinner.
People ain't trying to join a movement if all they're gonna do is feel bad.
Exactly. That's not how to grow a movement. We have to make being a white anti-racist feel amazing.
Right.
And I feel amazing. The community I have, the elders I have, the mentees I have, the love that I feel. This is so much better than any other kind of high I can imagine. I feel great.
The trick is to make it feel joyful.
Yes.
Without too much the excesses of pride. It's not.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly.
Right? So you're not
and
trying
no white saviorism and no white exceptionalism. Yeah. Right. That's a very nuanced balance, but that's what we're going to try and get at. I don't want to keep folks for too long. It's already 8:44. Thank you to everyone who is commenting. These comments are fantastic. I hope you will join us next week with Lynn Burnett.
And come visit me on the web.
David, I have one final question. Well, and also make sure to go to David's clubhouse room, White People Whispering, on Sundays at 11 Pacific, 2 Eastern.
And on website, because I have a LinkedIn presence here. You can, so does a dialogue company. You can go to our website. There's free materials. Those materials you can buy at thedialoguecompany.com. So
And
check it
go
out.
to David's workshops. I just have one final question for you, David. If
Okay.
you could wave a magic wand and
Ooh.
get white people to either stop doing something or start doing something, what would it be?
Learn how to tell a story that starts with, I'm not a racist person, but I sometimes have racist reactions. Like the time I boom, like everybody, like if white folks just learned how to tell the story that comes behind, I'm not a racist. I don't think I'm a racist person, but I sometimes have racist reactions, like the time when and then they could tell that story, and they start just making that a part of normal normal discourse between white people. I think that would go a long way to creating the anti-racist pro-democracy America that we need.
Thank you, David. I am so grateful to all of you who joined us. Thank you for your thoughtful comments. I'm sorry I was unable to bring them all on screen. Please do mark your calendar. We will be here every week at this time, 9 a.m. 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern, for Collect Our Cousins, engaging white people in the struggle for full democracy. Bye, everybody.
Take it easy, y'all.